the Week 14 edition of the Occupy Fantasy Podcast, DFS edition, and we're coming to you here a little bit late on a Friday.
Yeah, hopefully still in time for your weekend commute home. But yeah, better late than never. And now we have a couple more days of information to give you, so should be pretty good.
Yeah, if this ends up being a better time podcast, we might have to kind of keep it going in next year. But yeah, let's start out. It's 13 games, a little larger than the usual main slate.
Yeah, and like the last couple of weeks, not a ton of high total games, which always makes things interesting from especially a high risk perspective. But Lee, we do have a couple of big favorites though.
Yeah, we do. And before we jump into them, quick question. Any difference in a 13 game slate versus a 10 game slate for you as far as maybe contest selection and just kind of your philosophy?
It's not a huge difference for me personally, at least. It, it probably ends up lending itself to be a better low risk slate because we do have more options. Just in theory, not saying this week is especially that case, but with more options, likely more value to open up, more players in better spots, and generally you have an easier time fitting guys in low risk. And then you also have some paralysis by analysis and high risk with so many options to choose from.
Yeah. So let's jump into the heaviest favorites. We have the Packers, 13-point favorites against the Skins. Vikings are 13-point favorites against the Lions. The Texans are 9.5 against the Broncos, and the Browns are 7.5-point favorites against the Bengals. What jumps out at you?
I guess the first thing that jumps out to me is the Packers being such big favorites, yet none of their players are in the top 3 or 4 in projected ownership at their respective positions. So that was interesting to me. And then the Minnesota minus 13 versus Detroit. I think this will be a very important situation to figure out and get correct. And there's a possibility that there is no right answer, and it ends up sucking the value out of everyone. But it's Dalvin Cook, and he's not on the injury report. They said it's just a pain tolerance issue with that SC joint sprain. That's the joint where your collarbone meets your chest bone. So I don't know. As 13-point favorites, I would think that they would take it easy on Cook and mix in Alexander Madison a little more, or just rest Cook entirely. But Cook is adamant about playing, so I'm curious to see how this shakes out.
Yeah, it looks like he is trending in the right direction, but it is interesting given, it's not like the Vikings are in a desperation mode right now,
Right.
but I guess he just wants to play, and if it's a pain tolerance issue without, I guess, a long-term danger, he'll probably go.
Yeah, what do you think about in high risk contests playing Madison? If I know we generally like to just jam in the popular heavy volume running backs, but if you need to save some salary, do you think there's any merit to playing him in the hopes that either Cook gets hurt early or he just gets more work than usual?
Yeah, there's merit. It also depends on your risk tolerance. Like if you're gonna, if you have the bandwidth to enter, 50, 100 lineups, then sure. But if you're making 3, 4, 5 lineups in high risk contests, I'd stay away from it because it just seems like a scenario where there's some danger there. But with that said, we have seen him in favorable game scripts get some work, double-digit carries, and maybe this is one of those, right? 12.5-point favorites at home.
Yeah, if there was a spot for him to get more work, it's a spot where Cook is maybe limited and they're big favorites. So yeah, I agree with that. And another thing that jumped out to me, and I'm not sure if this is going to matter too much for DFS, but Cleveland being 7.5-point favorites against Cincy, who did get their first win last week. It seems a little high to me just on first glance, but I don't know. I think, and the fact that he's not in the top 4 or 5 of projected ownership, and probably Kareem Hunt's presence brings his popularity down, but I think that's a good spot for Nick Chubb too.
Oh yeah, I think it's a great spot for him and both guys, right? Actually, were you saying you think the Browns 7.5-point line is too short or too large?
I thought it was too high just on
Yeah.
first glance, but I don't know.
Interesting. Maybe I think the Bengals are a lot worse than you do and then the Browns maybe a little better, but I feel like that's one of the bounce back spots for Cleveland right now. And I mean, they have, I believe, Arizona after this week. So we'll see. I mean, if they can't beat Cincinnati and Arizona to get right and make a last kind of end of the season push here, then obviously they suck.
Yeah, disappointing season all around for them. I think I'm just falling victim to public recency bias and perception.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm with you.
And that game has a 41.5 point total. Let's look at some of the games with higher, or I should say the highest totals. The Kansas City New England game, which last year would have been a no brainer shootout, but this year still the highest implied total, despite how good New England's defense has looked most of the year. Carolina and Atlanta, 47 points. Tennessee, Oakland, 47 points, and the Colts Bucks 46.5 points. So not any team over 50, or not any game over 50 points.
Yeah, pretty nuts. The as we talk about in our single game write-ups, 47 is kind of that middle mark. Anything above that is considered a high total, and we only have one this week: Kansas City and New England.
Mm-hmm.
So stacking in high risk will be interesting. It looks like a lot of the ownership will come from the high favorite teams and not necessarily the high total games. Carolina
Right.
and Atlanta will get some ownership, but you're not going to see a ton of ownership in Kansas City, New England. Not a lot in Tennessee, Oakland. Not a lot in Indy, Tampa Bay. So really interesting slate of games to me, and I think kind of how Moose and I talked about on the Twitch stream in recent weeks, where maybe you're not fully stacking some of these games, or you're not stacking both sides because of the lack of high totals.
Yeah, I think it bodes well for some mini stacks and avoiding kind of the complete game stack, which is something you love doing in your higher risk contests. So let me ask you this: what is like? How does that alter kind of your strategy for like the 150 max like GPPs?
Yeah, so what I'd been doing early in the season, and what our research had told us was the most profitable way to go about 150 max in NFL is picking a handful of games and then actually stacking both sides. So like, and using the quarterback from both sides. So for instance, Kansas City, New England, I would stack half my game stacks with Mahomes. I would stack half my game stacks with Brady, and go at least two pass catchers or running backs with their quarterback on both sides. However,
Mhm.
in recent weeks, I've kind of come to the conclusion that, especially in these lower total weeks, which is pretty unusual, that sometimes one side of the game isn't worth fully stacking. Like last week, Philly Miami, which is where I won the WFFC tickets, I had tons of Philly stacks, but I only ran it back with Parker. I didn't have any Fitzpatrick
Yeah.
into Dolphins. I
Hmm.
only concentrate on the Philly side, and I think a lot of these games could end up being the same way.
Totally. And congrats for that, by the way. Brian's going to Puerto Rico next week, and has two entries. You want to tell folks a little about that?
Yeah, so if you haven't heard yet, it's the FanDuel World Fantasy Football Championship. It's 80 entries live down in Puerto Rico. Top prize is 500K, and all 80 spots get paid. I'll see if I can get one more ticket here this weekend. But yeah, having two entries out of 80 is pretty big. Gives me two shots at 500K, and got fortunate to win some satellites to get down there, and now I'm just pumped to get down there.
And might have a golf date with Donovan McNabb.
Yeah, that's surprisingly on the list of events. So, yeah, they got the A-listers out for this one.
But no, beautiful lineup, man. Like you said, kind of stacked the Eagles there, and only ran it back with Devontae Parker. So, kind of goes to show that with these lower implied totals, even like the conventional wisdom of these high risk contests should be questioned. So, let's talk about some of the highest projected owned players for this week, and we'll start at quarterback: Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, and Matt Ryan. I don't think any surprises there, especially with Matt Ryan getting his two pass catchers in the name of Julio Jones and Austin Hooper back.
Yep, and they get their first round offensive lineman back, who's been out since
Mm.
week one. So, pretty big upgrades for Ryan.
And
And
they got Young Ho Koo, who could give him an extra possession or two with an onside kick.
or three. I mean, yeah, anytime you have the best onside kicker in the history of the world, it makes great for game stacks.
We got it.
So,
We need to adjust that in the model actually because
the onside kick factor, yeah.
yeah. But no, yeah, it looks like he's in a good position against a Carolina Panthers team. But out of these three guys, given their price and ownership, who do you like the most?
Yeah, it's increasingly more difficult to pay up for Lamar.
Hmm.
So I think Deshaun is in a great spot against Denver. Is nearly 10-point home favorites. Matt Ryan still a little gun shy to trust him, especially in low risk contests after some of the duds
Hmm.
he's put up. But again, like you said, he's getting a lot of guys back. He's the cheapest of the bunch. So I mean, he's a top projected quarterback for a reason this week, and I think they should be fine in that spot.
Let's talk running back. So we did mention kind of the Minnesota backfield situation between Cook and Madison. It looks like Cook is gonna. How is that gonna like change ownership with the news that's kind of shifting right now?
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you. If Cook ends up being projected as one of the highest on running backs, we'll see how it shakes
Hmm.
out over the weekend. But if that's the case, like there's a lot of risk there. He's not really the definition of low risk for a running back. So I don't know if I
Hmm.
could play him in my low risk lineup. What do you think? Do you think there's enough there?
Yeah, I don't think so, and especially when you factor in the other options that you have, Leonard Fournette, being one of them. It's tough to justify it.
Yeah, it's like I said, we'll have to see how the ownership ends up this weekend. But
And assuming Le'Veon Bell is not going to miss the Dolphins game for whatever the flu or the cold.
yeah, whatever he's got, he's questionable, and Gay said he's unsure if he's going to play, so we'll have to see how that goes because that could affect ownership too if Ty Montgomery's getting a ton of snaps.
Hmm.
Devonta Freeman is the other guy here who has a great matchup, going to get volume, but hasn't been
Hmm.
great this year. So I don't feel comfortable with using him, but again, the price and volume is hard to overlook.
Hmm. And a couple guys that won't, maybe not be high owned, but I think are in interesting spots here. Um, Number one is Melvin Gordon, who's going to face a abysmal rush defense in Jacksonville.
True.
And I mean Derrick Henry, who I mean we know the volumes there, and like the dude's produced what 5 straight or 4 straight games of like over 25 fantasy points. So like, why isn't his ownership higher?
I think people just don't trust him, right? Like if Tennessee gets down, is he really going to be? He's not game script proof. At least that's what people are
Hmm.
thinking. But again, he's been incredibly efficient. He's outside of McCaffrey. I think he's number two in you know exceeding his expected fantasy points based on his volume. So absolutely incredible year for him. And I think if there's uncertainty with Cook, we could see Henry move up
Yeah,
into one of those highest projected backs.
yeah, I think so. And I mean the Raiders, who they've looked bad, losing to the Jets 34-3, getting spanked by the Chiefs. I don't know what's going on. Outside of like DFS. What do you think it like? What's going to happen in this matchup? Tennessee versus Oakland. Tennessee's traveling. I think the Raiders are 2.5 point favorites, but this is one of those games where I think that like one of these running backs has potential to pop, and it's probably going to depend on whose game script is more favorable.
I think you're right. Yeah, Jacobs didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday. Apparently, he has a fractured shoulder, but he returned to
Uh,
practice today. He's been playing with it all year. So, shout out to him for being that tough.
yeah.
Um, I don't know. I like the idea of stacking this game. I'm just trying to figure
Hmm.
out who I want to go with. I really like Darren Waller from Oakland side.
Yeah.
Tennessee, I don't know who I like. It's a low volume passing offense. Tannehill's been incredibly efficient, but I just don't know if he can
Hmm.
continue that pace.
Yeah, and for higher risk contests, I think it's okay to have a guy like Tannehill who won't have the necessary volume. He'll throw the ball 20 times for 250, but if he gets two passing touchdowns and runs for something like he did against Jacksonville, then he'll hit value and then some. Let's talk about receivers. We have Mike Evans, Jamison Crowder, we have DJ Moore, Odell Beckham, DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas. It's pretty loaded as far as guys that should be in like pretty safe positions.
Yeah, and we'll probably see higher ownership for some of these more expensive receivers this week, just because there are cheaper running backs. We didn't talk about Patrick Laird for Miami, but I imagine he'll be pretty popular at his price tag with Kalen Balaj out. So people will be able to fit in higher owned receivers this week, and maybe that's a way to differentiate yourself. Maybe you go more expensive running backs and cheaper receivers. So just something to think about. But what sticks out to me is guys who've disappointed in recent weeks but are on the underperforming receivers list. Doesn't matter. People are going to play them. It's a well-known thing now. So Mike Evans, Odell Beckham are near the top of the underperforming receivers list, and they're also going to be popular. So I think that has a lot to do with the matchups, but also the fact that they're due for big performances, and it's kind of an intersection of those two.
Perfect storm.
Yeah.
So tight ends, Hunter Henry, Travis Kelce, and Darren Waller, who you mentioned.
Yeah. Do you think the Patriots will be able to shut down Kelsey? That's the issue for me, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Tyreek Hill's good to go. So, like, I don't know. I really don't. I don't think they can shut down both guys. Like, I don't see the Chiefs scoring under 23 points. But, I mean, I don't know. I think Travis Kelce, like, if you look at his price right now, on DraftKings especially, it's been adjusted 6.2K compared to what it was last week. It's enough to warrant a higher risk play, but no, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But I get it, like Bill Belichick and kind of how they build this defense around it. Might be a tough one for Kelce.
Yeah, but that's the thing. We do get the discounts with the Patriots defense every week on DraftKings. So,
Yeah.
but again, like I said earlier, I really like Darren Waller here. His splits with and without Hunter Renfrow having a big role is pretty important. And yeah, he's also due for a touchdown. He's actually the only tight end who was near our underperforming receivers. So, big fan of Waller this week. I think he's the guy I'll have a lot of on Sunday.
And Hunter Henry, he only had 3 targets last week, but I mean, really, if you look at the 6 weeks before since he returned from injury, he's been heavily involved in the offense, and I mean, he has the same upside as all those guys, I think.
Yeah, I do too, for sure. Last week was a dud. I would just erase that from my memory and continue to play him because the dude's been playing like one of the most elite tight ends in the league. So.
And let's wrap it up with defenses. The Vikings for obvious reasons and the Browns. But we know with the defenses, sometimes for higher risk contests, it's not usually the popular team.
No, we'll see some ownership on the Jets too, the Redskins as well, just because of the price. Even though they're 13-point underdogs, we'll see them in some lineups. But again, what we like to do is look at teams that are in favorable spots at home, usually facing high volume, get pressure on the quarterback, and then if they get some favorable line movement in the betting markets, it's icing on the cake.
Let's go. Sneaky stacks before we jump into these underperforming receivers. Who do you like that's under the radar?
A lot of stacks, I think, this week, given all the totals kind of being in the middle. Miami and the Jets, maybe.
The Gase Bowl?
Yeah, the old Gase Bowl with Fitzpatrick or Donald you can go with. I like Indy and Tampa Bay. Tons of guys in that game that you could stack.
Yeah.
And then 2 more I'll name.
Who's that receiver on Tampa? Number 12 again?
Oh, he's pretty good, and I think we worship him, so we should know his name.
Yeah.
God
Maybe
something.
he'll come back to something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that and Marlon Mack looks all systems go. So do you feel like with how good Tampa's defense has been against the run, like does that turn you off against the Colts backfield?
Yeah, potentially. I just like a lot of the Colts pass catchers in general in this game. Even matchup aside, it's just very narrow target funnel. Zach Pasquale, Jack Doyle, and then they get Paris Campbell back this week, who's been heavily involved when he's been on the field. So those 3 guys, and then you add in the 2 big guys from Tampa. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to go with game stacks, so that makes it one of my favorites for sure.
And what about the Jaguars? Chargers. I know there's a couple players on both sides that are pretty interesting.
Yeah, Chris Conley continues to be on the underperforming list. Mike Williams, of course, stays on that list. He's got a permanent residence. Hasn't scored a touchdown yet this year. But Hunter Henry, you talked about. Fournette, we talked about in high-owned plays. So even though the total is pretty low in that game, maybe you don't go 3x1 or 3x2 stack, but a 2x1 or even a 1x1 as another part of your lineup could certainly make sense.
Now, I know as far as like reverse correlation and running backs playing against each other, But can you justify like a Leonard Fournette and along with the Melvin Gordon or an Austin Eckler in like a 100-player league?
Yeah, I definitely think you can. Yeah, there's some slight correlation between the two, and especially if the running back can catch passes, even better. So,
Hmm.
and both of those
Yeah,
guys are all three of those guys can be involved in the passing game. So I
exactly.
like that idea.
Cool. Let's move on to the underperforming receivers, our favorite part of the podcast.
Yep. Just to reiterate, these guys have
Hmm.
been in winning lineups all the time. Three or four of the guys were in my winning WFFC lineups, qualifier lineups last week. My 100K winning lineup, these guys were in there. So again, they're not all going to hit, but when they do, it's going to be low ownership, usually popping off. So guys for this week, Mike Evans tops the list. Scary Terry is back. Terry McLaurin. Lead any concerns just before we move on with Haskins and McLaurin being on this list?
No, I mean, when you look at kind of how Terry came onto the season, it was like, with sheer lightning and electricity. And last week's game was an obvious dud, but the volume, the potential, the upside, how much he costs, I think he's due, given how this Packers secondary is played.
That's true too. You put in that perspective. Packers have been getting up a ton of deep passes too, so gotta like Scary Terry. All right, other guys on the list for the week: Deontay Johnson in a paced up
Mhm.
game against the Cardinals, and then a trio of Patriots receivers in the lead. I don't know if the fact that all three of these guys are underperforming is indicative of the quarterback play. But
Oof.
Jacoby Myers, Julian Edelman, Philip Dorsett, all three of those guys. So we'll have to see how Mohamed Sanu his ankle is. But I mean, you can go with a lot of different guys from that side in that game.
Yeah, I think so. And that's like, the beauty in, playing a high risk contest is you just pick one of them, right? And kind of see what happens, especially if you're also looking at Kansas City um side and just like, maybe a Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and like a Julian Edelman type of stack
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that. We talked about the two guys in the same game: Chris Conley, Mike Williams. Talked
every
about
week.
it literally every week. So Pascal, who
Mm.
even though he caught he had 100 receiving yards last week, he's still on this list. He's due for a touchdown, so he's on the list.
Yeah.
Amari was on the list. He caught a touchdown and had over 20 fantasy points last night.
Hmm.
Odell, and then guys who just missed: Stephon Diggs in that Detroit game, Christian Kirk if you're playing Pittsburgh, Arizona, and then Darren Waller in that Tennessee Oakland game. So
Yeah, but I mean, look, we can't, iterate this enough. When you are playing high risk contests and you need to save some money for a receiver, at the receiver spot with some upside, this is where you look
yes,
for sure.
right.
So pick a
And
few guys, sprinkle them in, and see what happens.
yeah, start with your stacks. Fill in the running backs that you like the most on the slate, and then fill in these guys around. Like last week, even though I made 150 lineups, there were so many guys on this list that outside of my stacks, these are only other guys I used. Like,
Hmm.
so I stacked some receivers and then just literally picked guys from this list. Some other weeks where we have lesser guys, then you can expand your player pool a bit. But
Hmm.
we had a question on our Twitch last week asking, should we be flexing a running back in high risk? And I say when we have weeks like this with so many receivers expected to blow up, I think it's safe to do receiver in high risk in your flex because we have so many guys to choose from that can have big games.
No, I think so too. I know like the research done, I think on the millionaire makers and just saying, oh, well, like six, whatever number percentage of winning lineups featured a running back at the flex, but that doesn't, it's not like, there isn't like a direct causation here.
Right.
So, it's very doable. Of course, sometimes what happens is you might get a dud, right? Like receivers are capable of getting, six targets for 12 yards.
Yep.
So, but you're still playing high risk contests, and that's kind of the name of the game.
Right, exactly. So why not go with guys who have the high ceiling at generally lower ownership? That's the way to go, and it's been proven time and time again this season that this is the route you want to take in high risk contests.
Awesome. Well, that wraps it up here for us. We'll catch you guys over the weekend. Best of luck, week 14. We're gearing up, man. There's some big weeks ahead. Week 15. is like almost the would you call it the DFS championship week or
I think personally, I would call it that.
yeah. So keep stacking those tickets and maybe meet Brian out there in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you're gonna be down there, definitely hit me up for sure.
Awesome. All right, guys, you have a great weekend. We'll catch you soon.